Ms. LaViolette, please take the stand. Before we proceed with testimony, the court has denied the motion for mistrial. Juror number 5 has been excused.
Mr. Jodi, I also ask before testimony begins that the jury be asked about media coverage over the weekend.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ladies and gentlemen, juror number 5 has been excused. You should not speculate or guess about the reasons for that decision. Did any of you see or hear anything about this case in the media? I see no hands. Did anyone try to speak with you about this case other than the participants in this case, including the attorneys and court staff? Has anyone tried to speak with you about the case? I see no hands. Ms. LaViolette, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Ms. Wilmot, you may continue.
Thank you, Judge. May I?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. LaViolette.
Good morning.
Last week we finished up and we were talking about an email conversation between Chris and Sky Hughes, friends of Mr. Alexander, and Mr. Alexander. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. And that conversation actually spanned, we were specifically talking, I think, about the email from January 29th. Is that right?
Yes.
And did the conversation actually span over a few days?
Yes, it did. It went from the 29th to the 31st.
Okay. And have you reviewed the email on the 31st at some point?
Yes, I did.
All right. Judge may approach. Ms. Violette, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 562. If you need to refer to it, let me know. I want to ask you a couple questions about the email conversations from January 29th to the 31st, okay?
Yes.
Can you give us an idea? About why these conversations take place?
Chris and Sky Hughes had a conversation with Jodi Arias regarding the relationship between Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander. When they did that, Jodi then talked to Chris and Sky Hughes, and when she talked to them, they advised her to move on.
Judge, may we approach?
You may. may continue.
Ms. LaViolette, based on your review of these emails between the parties, what was your impression as to what Mr. and Mrs. Hughes were discussing with Ms. Arias?
They were discussing the fact that Mr. Alexander has quite a history with women and the way he's treated women in the past, and they were advising her that she may want to move on.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
That she may want to move on and move out of that relationship.
All right. And after this initial conversation that Jodi has with Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, is it your understanding that Jodi then speaks to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, she speaks to Mr. Alexander about the conversation.
All right. And based on that conversation, does Mr. Alexander send an email to his friends Chris and Sky Hughes?
Yes, he does.
All right. And in that email, does that prompt a response then from Chris Hughes individually and then another email from Sky Hughes individually?
Yes.
All right. Can we talk about those then for a second?
Sure.
All right. And I guess specific with Chris Hughes, when he responds, does he, based on your review of his response, what is your impression of that conversation?
That he is basically telling Mr. Alexander that he is suggesting to Mr. Alexander that he has reason to believe that he mistreats Miss Arias, that he is a flirt, that he has a history of not being particularly good with women, that he's a flirt, that he's the biggest flirt this side of the Mississippi, that he says things to Miss Arias that aren't very kind.
Sustained.
I'm not asking you specifically what he says to what Mr. Alexander might say to Jodi, but is it your impression that Mr. Hughes believed that Mr. Alexander was not saying nice things?
Yes, it was my impression.
And was it your impression that Mr. Hughes believed that Mr. Alexander really wasn't all that interested in Jodi?
Overruled.
Yes.
However, based on the email that Mr. Alexander sends to Chris Hughes, did you get an impression for how Mr. Alexander felt about Jodi at the time?
Yes, I did. There were very positive statements. Mr. Alexander expressed interest.
Overruled.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Mr. Alexander, what?
Expressed interest
Okay.
that being with Miss Arias was like winning the wife lotto, that she was a good person, a fantastic, amazing woman, and
So talking about your impressions, was it something that Mr. Alexander seemed to view Jodi at the time very favorably?
yes, yes, he did.
And so because of this information, did Mr. Hughes, is it apparent from Mr. Hughes' email that he was, that he didn't know that?
Yes.
Overruled.
Based
Yes.
on, yes, okay.
Yes.
And is that from based on your reading of Mr. Hughes' email?
That's based on my reading of Mr. Hughes' email.
Okay. And can we talk about the email from Sky Hughes, Mrs. Hughes?
Yes.
And that's an email that was sent also in response to what Mr. Alexander responded, right? So, is that right?
Yes,
And if you're going to look at the exhibit, just let us know.
I'm going to look at the exhibit.
Do you need to do that to refresh your recollection?
Well, I'm pretty clear on it, but I just want to really, yes, I want to recollect.
Okay. Just let me know when you're finished.
Okay. Okay.
All right. And based on your reading of the email from Sky Hughes back to Mr. Alexander, what was your impression of that email?
My impression was that she had serious concerns about Mr. Alexander and Miss Arias's relationship, that she was concerned about his history and how he treated her, that she was also apologetic and felt that maybe she overstepped when she talked to Jodi, but that she talked a lot about his history and why she believed the things she did.
Why she believed what?
Why she believed that Mr. Alexander was not someone who would get involved deeply with Miss Arias and his history of how he was with women.
Okay. And did Mr. Alexander talk about how he had treated another woman in his email?
Yes, he talked about a woman by the name.
Overall,
He talked about a woman by the name of Brandy. He said, with Brandy, I'm certain.
Give us your impression of based on what Mr. Alexander said about how he treated this other woman. What did you get from it?
That he treated her badly, but that he didn't feel badly about it.
Overruled.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the answer. He treated her badly.
He
and-
treated her badly, but he didn't feel badly about having treated her badly because he didn't.
Okay. Was it something? And is this something that the Hugheses took into account, his past behavior?
Yes, they did.
All right. And between the emails of Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, how did they speak of Jodi?
They spoke very favorably of Jodi.
And was there anything else about your impressions with regard to the email from Sky Hughes?
Not in particular.
All right. And to clarify, based on your reading of this case and your understanding, do you know who Chris and Sky Hughes are?
Yes, they were friends of Travis's, apparently very close friends.
Sustained.
Based on your reading of the emails and what Mr. and Mrs. Hughes say, are you aware of how they know Mr. Alexander?
They know Mr. Alexander.
With a question, yes or no?
Yes, it is a yes or no question.
Yes.
Are you aware? Okay.
Yes.
Then, and how is that?
They are connected with him.
Approach. continue.
Ms. LaViolette, when in looking at relationships and progressions of relationships and ultimately making opinions about relationships, does it matter do you gather information from different sources?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And when you're looking at getting this information from different sources, does it matter to you who the sources are, or do you just take it from anybody?
It matters to me who the sources are.
And so if the sources are somebody who is close to a person that you're considering in a relationship, does that make a difference to you?
It does, because they tend to know that person a little better.
Okay. And so based on that information and your reading of the emails, do you have an understanding of whether or not the Hugheses are considered close friends to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, they are.
All right. And did they know him for a while?
They knew him for 5 years.
And that's prior to these emails?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. All right. I wanted to talk to you next about an email from Ms. Arias to Mr. Alexander on February 7th of 2007, okay?
Yes.
So this is, I guess this would be just 7 days or so after the email conversation occurs between Chris Hughes, Sky Hughes, and Mr. Alexander. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
All right. Judge, may I approach?
Yes.
All right, I'm handing you an exhibit with the marked exhibit 563. If you need to look at it, let me know. Okay?
Yes.
All right. In this, in your review of this case, did you review emails with regard between Ms. Arias and Mr. Alexander?
Yes, I did.
And did those emails, did some of them give you an idea about the type of relationship they had?
Yes, they do.
And is there an email on February 7th of 2007 from Ms. Arias?
Yes, there is.
And it goes to Mr. Alexander?
Yes, it does.
And is there anything about that email that was important to you?
Yes, in this email,
Yes or no?
Sustained.
yes,
I'm just,
yes.
okay. My next question is, what was important?
It was important because Ms. Arias apparently had a talk with Mr. Alexander, and he addressed her concerns, the concerns that she had after talking to the Hughes. And because of that, she said she felt better about the relationship. Overall.
Yes.
She felt better about the relationship and was grateful that he addressed all her concerns, and she had more faith in their relationship after having a discussion with Mr. Alexander.
All right. And what about that is important to you?
Well, once again, the coming together, the doubts, the feeling bad, the pattern that's about having episodes, feeling bad, and then having sort of a loving respite, a period where things are cleared up and people bond and they get close together again. And so that's happening in this relationship.
All right. And so after hearing bad things about Mr. Alexander from Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, then based on this email, things are cleared up between the two of them.
Yes.
All right. And does that give Jodi any hope then for their relationship?
Sure. I mean, part of what happens when people come together after an argument, any argument, is that most people, when it's resolved or they feel that there's resolution, they get close and they feel connected again, and there's a trust there, and there's a hope about the relationship, and a good feeling that the relationship is proceeding in a good way.
All right. And is hopefulness, is that one of the things we talked about last week with regard to relationships and women who might stay in a battered relationship?
Yes, we talked about learned hopefulness, which is the whole notion that between episodes of distress or between episodes that could be seen as abusive, there's healing. And during that healing, people get to recover, they get to have faith, they get to believe that there's going to be change, and they usually have some evidence that that's true. And the evidence in this case is that he addresses all her concerns, and she feels good about it.
All right, and just so we're clear, we're not saying that there was any particular incident of abuse January 29th to the 31st?
No, we're not.
Okay, and you had also mentioned that it could be just distressing issues.
Yes,
Okay, is that what you were talking about?
yes,
Okay. On February 14th, which is Valentine's Day, is that right?
yes,
All right. On Valentine's Day, part of the work that you've done on this case is speaking with Jodi, right?
yes, it is.
Okay. And in speaking with Jodi, did you learn whether or not Mr. Alexander got her Valentine's present?
Yes, he did.
And do you remember what it was that she got?
She got a pair of Spider-Man underpants.
All right. And was that sent to her in the mail?
I don't know.
Okay. Did she also get a T-shirt with the name Travis Alexander's?
Yes, she did.
And, I'm sorry, or Travis's?
Travis's.
Okay.
You know, it was either Travis Alexander's or Travis's.
Okay. The important part, though, is did it have an apostrophe S, meaning it was in a,
By counsel, the important part.
Sustained rephrase.
did it have a apostrophe?
Yes, it did.
And apostrophes are used for what?
Usually possessive.
Okay. And did she also get a little pair of like boy shorts or some kind of underwear?
Spider-Man underwear.
Well, did she also get underwear that had the name Travis written on the back?
I'm unaware of that.
Oh, okay. All right. The T-shirt, with the T-shirt, that was something that she didn't make it, right?
No, she did not.
Okay. All right. So then let's move to February 18th. And this is February 18th of 2007. At this time, do you know what the status of the relationship is between Jodi and Travis, what they are saying it is?
They're saying that they're an official couple at that point.
Okay. And if they're an official couple, are they calling each other boyfriend and girlfriend?
No, they're not calling each other girlfriend and boyfriend.
All right. And do you know why?
Mr. Alexander did not want them to be designated as girlfriend and boyfriend, but they were a couple.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's already in evidence is Exhibit 438. You see the top of that, there's a subject, and it says FW. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know what that means in email language?
I don't know email language very well,
Okay.
or hardly at all.
All right. You don't email very much, is that right?
That would be accurate.
Okay. And are you aware that FW means forward?
Yes, I am aware that means forward.
Okay. And the subject line is our friendship, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you can see who is it from?
It's from Jodi Arias,
And it's dated,
February 18th,
and it's written to.
Travis Alexander.
Okay, so when we say written to, because this is a forward, it's forwarded to Travis, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then we have what looks to be, in that section there, the original. Do you see that from Jodi Arias?
Yes.
And the subject is the same, right?
Yes.
And the same date, February 18th?
Yes.
All right, and let's look at the time. So it looks like this was sent at 22:29. Do you know military time?
Yes, it's 10:29.
Okay, PM?
Yes.
All right, and then we can see that it was forwarded 22:58, which is 10:58, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so just about a half hour later, is that right?
Yes.
All right, and this is an email to, well, have you reviewed this email before?
Yes, I've reviewed the email.
All right, and it was written to a person named Abe, is that right?
Yes.
Is there, well, actually, it's in evidence. So let's talk about this for a second. The context of the email, the subject itself, do you remember as a whole, can you give us as a whole what the email is about?
The email's really about Ms. Arias, Jodi, contacting a man that she had gone out with a couple of times and telling him that she was not going to be going out with him anymore, that they needed to rethink their friendship, and that she, although she was not officially Travis Alexander's girlfriend, that she started thinking about how Travis would think about her having this time with another man, and that she didn't think it was a good idea, and that she wanted to curtail their relationship.
All right, and let's go to, let's see. You see here where it says, although I'm not married?
Yes.
All right, can you read that sentence for us?
Although I'm not married and I'm not Travis's girlfriend, from now going forward, I feel that you and I should keep a friendly distance.
All right, and does she talk about how that they shouldn't hug anymore?
Yes,
And,
because that could be misconstrued.
okay. And does she talk about, at the bottom here, can you read us that paragraph? You already know.
You already know that I'm seeing Travis. I've never divulged many details about our relationship simply because I consider certain details to be sacred and private and should be kept between him and I anyway.
All right, and keep going.
I know I've told you that we are not in a committed relationship, but regardless of our status, I care so deeply about him. I often ask myself, how would Travis feel about this? Or how I would feel if Travis were doing what I'm doing right now with someone else. In fact, this reasoning has been a compelling force behind all my actions, decisions, and conduct as of late.
All right. So with regard to this email, and knowing that it was forwarded to Mr. Alexander, is this important to you at all in your review of their relationship?
It is.
Why is that?
Well, Jodi is, for one thing, looking at how Travis feels, and that's very important to her. She has empathy and thinking about how Mr. Alexander might feel about her relationship. She's also forwarding the information as if she needs proof to Mr. Alexander that she's ended that relationship, which I find a little unusual, since he has indicated that it's okay for her to date other people.
All right, and even though he's indicated that it's okay for her to date other people, and that you have that information from the emails between the Hugheses and Mr. Alexander, is that right?
Yes.
And also from those emails, are you also aware that Mr. Alexander, that they felt that Mr. Alexander would guilt Jodi if she did see somebody else?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And in fact, in those emails, does Mr. Alexander address two people that Jodi had gone on a date with?
Yes.
And was there any approval from Mr. Alexander?
No, in fact, Mr. Alexander said that the one man,
Sustained.
What was your impression of what Mr. Alexander thought?
that one of the men was a non-believer and not really worthy, and that the other man was a 45-year-old bald Jew, and that they weren't good candidates for dating Miss Arias, for dating Jodi.
And based on those email conversations, did the Hugheses believe that Miss Arias would feel guilty about going out with anybody else?
Speculation, hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you get an impression of that, of how Miss Arias would feel, or was made to feel if she would see anybody else?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
May we approach?
may continue.
Ms. Lawala, did you speak to Ms. Arias about this letter that she had to write to Mr. Abdahadi?
Yes, I did.
All right, and did she tell you that she had to write it?
She told me that Mr.
Overruled.
Yes, she told me that she felt that she needed to write it
Okay, and why is that?
because Mr. Alexander was not feeling comfortable with that relationship, and because, as Ms. Hughes indicated, he was jealous.
Overruled.
And
That-
so, as Ms. Hughes indicated, that he was jealous?
That the only part of his reply that she laughed at was when he said he wasn't jealous.
Okay, so based on what Ms. Arias told you, as well as what you've read in their emails, do you see a connection between how the Hugheses believed that Mr. Alexander was kind of telling her a double standard? Go and date other people, but if you do, he guilts her. Is that one of the things they said?
Yes, they
Okay.
believed that he was jealous and that he didn't really mean for her to date other people.
All right. And then we see just a few weeks later, Miss Arias writing a letter to a friend who basically terminating that relationship. Is that what this letter is to Abe?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is that important to you in the scheme of a relationship?
It's important to me because jealousy is often a precursor to controlling behavior. Because when people feel jealous and insecure, they oftentimes try or attempt to control other people. And it's not that jealousy isn't a normal human emotion, it's the degree that jealousy occurs that makes the difference.
All right. I want to move on to May of 2007.
Yes.
In speaking with Miss Arias, did she tell you whether or not, did she tell you about a time when Mr. Alexander woke her up by having vaginal sex with her?
Yes, she did.
All right, and when was that, approximately?
It was approximately May 10th, sometime around that time. Early May.
Early May.
Early May of 2007.
All right, and we know that, well, what do you know about the incident? Why don't you tell us that?
What Miss Arias, what Jodi relayed to me was that she was woken up in the middle of the night with Mr. Alexander penetrating her, and then she stopped him because she believed that was a sin, and she believed she needed to stop that behavior, that was the ultimate sin in regard to chastity in the Mormon faith, and that it was against her religion, and she didn't want to go through with having vaginal sex. And at that time, that Mr. Alexander then pushed her head down, and she had oral sex with him.
All right. Now, up until May of 2007, are you aware whether or not they've already had sexual contact? Maybe not vaginal intercourse, but have they already had sexual contact?
They've had oral sex and anal sex.
Okay. And so this vaginal sex, was this something you said that violated the laws of chastity?
Yes.
And was that according to what Miss Arias knew at the time?
That was according to what Miss Arias knew. That was according to what Mr. Alexander told Miss Arias.
Sustained.
How did Miss Arias know about the law of chastity?
She was informed about doctrine in the Mormon Church by Mr. Alexander. He was basically her.
Good question, she answered it.
I'm sorry, part of your
She
objection.
answered the question as to how she knew.
Judge, this is direct.
Sustained, ask another question.
All right, what else were you going to say?
I was going to say that Mr. Alexander was her spiritual guide and really taught her the doctrine in the Mormon Church, the Gospels in the Mormon Church, and was very much a person that she looked up to in regard to his knowledge of the Gospels and his knowledge of Mormon Mormon faith and his position in the Mormon Church.
All right. And with regard to the vaginal sex in May, what does that speak to? Is that important to you, the fact that she was able to say no?
It was important, yes, it was important to me.
Okay, why is that?
Because she was able to set a limit. She still had boundaries, and the boundaries were about stopping him at a place that she believed was a real violation of the law of chastity. So she was able to say, no, I can't do this at that time.
Okay. And and ultimately she still ended up performing some type of an oral, well, she performed oral sex with Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes, she did.
But that was something, according to her knowledge, based on what Mr. Alexander told her, was okay. Is that right?
Sustained.
Was it okay, based on her knowledge, to perform oral sex to Mr. Alexander?
It was a lesser sin to perform oral sex.
All right. And is that what Mr. Alexander had told her?
Yes, it was.
All right. Judge, this is probably a good time.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the noon recess at this time. Counsel, please approach. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask that you be especially careful about avoiding contact with anyone, having any media contact, allowing anyone to speak with you today during the noon recess. I'm going to ask security to escort you out a different door for purposes of the lunch hour, and that you convene in a different location. We'll tell you where that will be, just so that you can avoid the front of the court building. Please remember the admonition. Go back to the jury room and wait until someone comes to escort you out for the lunch hour. You are excused. We'll see you back at 1:25. Thank you. The record will show the jury has left the courtroom. Ms. LaViolette, you may step down. We are at recess until 1:30.